Well, welcome to another episode of The Warrior's Walk. Today we're going to be talking about faith versus fear. Is prepping for Christians? So stay tuned for today's episode.
So if I'm quoting you correctly, Jesus was a prepper.
He was a prepper.
He is a prepper.
He's preparing a place for us right now.
Experience is a lot lighter than a backpack full of books. So getting reps and just doing it before the survival situation is one of the wisest things you could do. And I would say, again, this isn't out of spirit of fear. This is just being smart and wise.
Too, we see some biblical examples of preppers. We think of Joseph, who got commanded to prepare for 7 years of famine.
Have the ability to defend your family, I think, is probably one of the highest level things that you should be trained up on, because I knew one gentleman that he had, 5-year food cache. He had probably 100 years worth of ammo. Like, he had so many things. He died in a plane crash. If you really want to blow your cover as a prepper, tell everybody you're a prepper, because guess where everyone's going to show up.
Yeah, I was I've told you that before. But I'm just going to go over to Todd's house if things, go
right.
down.
I've had a lot of people tell me that. And so all my supplies would be gone in a day if everybody actually showed up.
Yeah.
And so
now, Todd, you prepared a lot of people for a lot of different scenarios in your former life, in your Navy SEAL time. And you even taught survival in Kodiak, Alaska. So this is something that's near and dear to your heart as far as preparing for worst case scenarios, preparing for different things that you might find yourself in. We share a survival tip every time you're here. There's a whole industry, a huge industry actually, as you know, on prepping and survival, and it can be sometimes overwhelming. And so the question we're going to tackle today is prepping good for Christians? Should we as Christians view prepping differently than other people? If there's a scale of, as far as not being prepared for anything and living in a bunker full time underneath, the earth and, or in the ground and being, full out prepper, is there a scale that Christians should fall on, in between those two? So we're going to be tackling some of those questions, of course, some biblical perspective on preparing and prepping. And so interesting dynamic today. I'm excited to talk about this. Would you consider yourself a prepper?
Good question. So I am probably not a hardcore prepper. And for those listening, there's so many different levels. I think Keith said it well when you said about a sliding scale. And we'll unpack all this, but really, I think ultimately what you and I want to really address is the heart behind the matter, right? Of prepping. But certainly I would go as far as to say I have, food for a certain amount of season. I have medical supplies, and I, when bad weather turns, I have the ability for power, and I have the ability for, extra batteries for flashlights and all those things. And so, I would say I prep to a certain level, but do I prep to the point where I'm hunkered down in a bunker, and just, waiting for the end of time? No.
Well, and even being from the survival community, you rubbed shoulders with a lot of different
some of the best preppers.
More on the extreme side. So I'm sure your view of prepping where you are is way less extreme than some other people that you've known.
Some people would say I was foolish.
But
I've also seen some of those people that had the underground bunker with all the supplies, die from a disease.
Yeah.
In the end, I think, again, it goes back to the heart of the matter. What are you prepping for?
Yeah. Well, and I've seen this kind of, in this whole industry, because I get I get ads for stuff, or I see the algorithm will serve up a video, on YouTube or social media where I'm like, okay, yeah, this is so fear-based. They're, the motivation for selling you products that would help you to, prep is all about fear. There's this, doom and gloom happening. We know, as Christians that, things in the end will get pretty severe. There's going to be end times. And so there's that aspect of people that are Christians thinking of, okay, well, I need to be prepared for this. There's differing views on eschatology of will we be around during these really difficult times? Will we be raptured up before the tribulation? All these different things. So depending on even where your belief is on eschatology, this could be a serious question to ask is, should I be prepared for the end times? But I think more the heart of it today that we would encourage to is just being wise. Mm-hmm. In other words, I think of preparation even just I packed a lunch today because I was prepared to eat lunch. It's something I do every day. So I packed a lunch. I thought ahead to prepare myself so I didn't have to either not eat or go out to, a restaurant and spend more money. So, I mean, there's levels of preparation, of course, that we want to be wise about. Like, should you have a backup generator if your power goes down? If your power goes down frequently, that's pretty wise. Like, so you don't spoil food. Like, you don't, should you have some canned goods on hand in case, your refrigerator goes down? So there's things like that where there's natural disaster, but then there's also like end times prepping that I think might be even more, severe.
Right. And I think that goes back to the sliding scale, right? I mean, even the Bible talks about, look at the ant, how he prepares, for the winter and stuff like that. You see the squirrels out there, prepping and getting ready for winter. And same thing. Like I try to get, the amount of firewood that I think I'm going to need. And have that ready just in case the power goes out. Another level to boil water, And so all those things are reasonable, and the Bible doesn't shy away from us being responsible and preparing, especially for those of us leading families, right?
Yep.
We want to look not just to our own needs, but to the needs of our spouse, to our children, and beyond. And so and you brought up a good point, too. I think it's kind of like, not to quote a secular movie, but, like the secret of Fight Club is there is no Fight Club. If you really want to blow your cover as a prepper, like tell everybody you're a prepper, because guess where everyone's going to show up.
Yeah, I was like, I've told you that before. We're like, I'm just going to go over to Todd's house if things, go
right.
down.
I've had a lot of people tell me that. And so all my supplies be gone in a day if everybody actually showed up.
Yeah.
And so I think there's that level. But same thing as believers, do you turn somebody away, who needs antibiotics? Maybe you have one set of general, wide spectrum antibiotics that could pretty much cover anything. Do you give it to that one stranger that needs help?
Yeah.
So there's a lot of moral things you're going to have to wrestle with too.
Definitely.
If that situation arises.
Yeah. Now, when it comes to even extreme behaviors, so I think like people like quitting their jobs and just doing this full time. Yeah, like like racking up debt to prepare, for all this stuff, living off the grid. I mean, I think if you're motivated by fear, distrust, sense of impending doom, that might be a sign that you're being consumed by it. So we don't want to be consumed by anything other than the love of the Lord. So if this is like consuming your thoughts so much that you're preparing for this, and I would say almost everybody is some level of a prepper in the sense of, do you have enough gas in your car now to make it past where you're going today? It's like, that's preparation for a longer journey than you expect. So do you have a savings account? So there's levels of preparation that we wouldn't say like, oh, that's extreme or that's weird. But I think when it comes to the way we live, I think our society, when you look at the grand scheme of even history, is probably the least prepared to endure things. It was a very common practice to grow food and then store it for months, canning food. I mean, like even my grandparents, like huge vegetable gardens that they would can and keep in a storage cellar. So there was a level of prepping that I don't think we're definitely not as prepared as previous generations. When it comes to even just food supply and just how they thought, because they didn't know if they were going to have a steady chain of grocery stores being stocked and all that stuff. So when it comes to different things that we would prepare for, of course, like it's wise to prepare for some things like a natural disaster or a power outage, or just to protect your home, or to care for loved ones if they have medication that they'll need, like to stock up on some medication that they'll need that might not be accessible if there's a natural disaster. But we're also seeing like natural disasters can really wipe out supply chains, and like what we saw in the hurricane, North Carolina. And, so flooding, or like, what is the level of preparedness that you want to have for you and your family? I'd say, again, just to address the really, the heart behind it is to really think of the biblical challenge, to not fear. So scripture says we're not to live in fear in Isaiah 41:10, Matthew 10:28. Our calling is to trust in God's sovereignty and focus on making disciples. So if this is consuming to the point where it's interfering with a mission, the Great Commission, but even that key verse in 1 Peter 3:14, do not fear their threats. Do not be frightened. We shouldn't be living in fear. Like, we've not been given a spirit of fear. So I would say your motivation can be a huge thing. But then also your motivation on, is it just biblically being wise with resources by being prepared for different events that might happen? Or is it a self-centered survivalism where it's like, I'm just preparing so that I will survive whatever, but I'll turn away everybody else, like you were talking about.
Yeah. No, and I think that's it's healthy for us to wrestle with those things. And again, I think I've wrestled with it too, hanging out with men specifically that are extreme preppers. I mean, I knew one gentleman that he had, 5-year food cache. He had probably 100 years worth of ammo. Like, he had so many things. He died in a plane crash. So it was like, all these different things that he prepared for.
Yep.
And so in the end, it's like, how do we want to be known, and what do we want to represent? And so I definitely like the idea of being prepared. Like, I like the idea of being able to help somebody, if their battery goes dead. And I have, there's so many different ways, from jumper cables to all these different battery chargers now, where you can help somebody with that. And it's just those basic things. I would say today, with YouTube and all the other skills, maybe the listeners, I know we have a lot of young men listening, and maybe they grew up where they didn't have a dad teach them hard skills. A lot of these skills can still be learned. I recall, this kind of goes off topic a little bit, but it emphasizes that we have so many people that depend on others to do things for them. I remember changing brake pads in my driveway a while back, and almost every neighbor stopped and said, "What are you doing?" Because, like, no one works on their car anymore.
Yeah.
And not that I can do everything on a car, but I was like, I'd rather save $900 and just change out, buy $90 worth of brake pads. Argue that a lot of people do drive with hope as a method, where they don't look at their gas gauge, right?
Yeah.
My philosophy, like, I think half a tank is empty.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, if you get to half a tank, it's like, it's time to find that gas station.
That's one thing I pride myself in. I've never run out of gas my whole life. So, yeah. I mean, in a car. Yeah. Maybe in the mower or something.
I've definitely seen E minus, a few times.
I've had my gas light on.
Straight.
Yeah. But never ran out of gas. So, I think with that, too, we see some biblical examples of preppers. We think of Joseph, who God had commanded to prepare for 7 years of famine in Genesis 41. So he prepared not just for his own family, but for a nation. So he stored up grain, and that's actually what enabled, God to, he was able to care for his own people, as they experienced famine too and came to him for food. And so, so there's some biblical examples.
There's probably a boat builder that prepared for something.
Yeah, I would say like Noah and his ark, they prepared for a massive flood. Of course, this is God directed as well.
Yeah.
So we shouldn't see, being prepared as a sin or something negative, but it can be, just like anything, it can become an idol. It can be, consuming focus to where it would distract, other people. Distract you from caring for other people.
Right.
And being so hyper-focused on this fear aspect. But then you have some kingdom-focused prepping, which, could be in that same vein of motivation of preparing so that you'll be in a position to help other people in a disaster or in a severe event. And I just think about that too, even though we experienced the pandemic, and I remember there was a gentleman in our church when we had a huge shortage of masks to care for people. He had a supply that he was like, "Hey, I have a pretty good stock that I can just donate to you guys," and we use those and so with that, like, even just being prepared in that sense to help other people in times of tragedy. But yeah, when it comes to a scale, because we mentioned this several times, a scale, I'm just curious to know. So, like, with your background, you have Navy SEAL, survival, tips that you share on here, but also you taught survival to the special forces. When it comes to like a scale of like 1 being absolutely not prepared, 10
right.
being the most extreme that you've met, like because you've even gone to like conventions and like prepper or like survival. What do they call them? Like the events that they gather. What is that? Like a convention? Do they have
gatherings?
Okay, we'll say gatherings. Yeah, because it's not like it's at a convention.
No, they're usually outside.
Yeah, say they're just like in the middle of a field somewhere.
Long.
Yeah, and so when it comes to that scale of like 1 being not prepared at all, where if if the grocery store closed down, you'd starve, versus 10 being like 100 years of ammo and 25 years of food or whatever, where do you think you are on that scale based on where you would assess yourself?
Wow, way to throw me under the bus. I don't know. I could argue all the middle numbers pretty well.
Yeah.
But I mean, I always feel like there's more I could do. I even look at the little small piece of land we have, and I'm like, I have dreams of things I'd like to do to be more prepared. And so, if I were to throw a number on a dartboard, I'd say 6, and like, but I would also say I know many of the shortcomings I have. And what's interesting though is like, for instance, let's say, you put a pond in and you got catfish. So you got a meat source there and you got your big garden. In the end, people need to understand, like, you can still have all that and it can still go away like in a day if people lose their mind, unless you have the ability to defend it. And then can you legally defend it? You know, because I mean, there still should be some law and order, prayerfully. If not, like, at what point, like, are you going to take someone's life because they're, you know, fishing in your pond? So there's a lot of things to think about, you know, as a believer. Like, you know, got to put that hat on too. You know, we're not separating ourselves from Christ, you know, if it's doom and gloom. So, like, how do we carry about smartly and live for eternity? And so, yeah, I mean, there's all kinds of, you know, like, I think, you know, my wife and I, we'd love to have, you know, like a certain plot of land where it's, you know, you're Dr. Doolittle and you got all the animals. So grandkids are walking around and having fun and stuff, but also knowing there's a purpose behind all those animals, right? And that they're food. And so, yeah, there's definitely things I could dream and do better.
Yep.
But I think we're in a good spot to weather, you know, short issues, you know, but I would say long term, who knows?
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, because there's so many variants of what could
lot of
possibly
variables.
happen, or, you know, what, yeah.
And I don't drift to the far extreme. Like, there's some people out there who's like, well, I'll just wait till it goes down and I'll just take stuff from people.
Yeah.
Again, that's not biblical.
Exactly.
So
yeah.
got to be careful. And then what's motivation there?
Yeah. Well, and I think, of course, like, you know, depending on if there is a severe event, you know, of course, like the easy ones that are more likely, I mean, where we live in Virginia here, not a whole lot of flooding or like hurricanes, earthquakes, tornadoes. Like, we're not in Tornado Alley. So it depends on where you live in the country or in the world, really. That can depend on, you know, what you can be prepared for. Yeah. But when it comes to here, you know, there's not a likely chance of major earthquakes. We had one, we've had a couple here, you know, past 10 years or so. But yeah, when it comes to just natural disasters, yeah, obviously being prepared for some of that. But
well, an example, like my mom lives in Tornado Alley, and for the longest time they didn't have any kind of shelter, and so I convinced them to get, you know, one of those concrete shelters put in their garage, you know, so it was bolted down because they don't have a basement. I was like, you need to have somewhere to go. As you get older, you're not necessarily going to just pack up and roll to the shelter.
Yeah.
So you need to be able to get to something fairly quickly on your own property. Yeah. So definitely, you know, I think it is play it like you see it, but you need to know your environment, you know, for sure.
Yeah. And one of the things, though, that I've seen recently that, you know, it depends on who you talk to, that say that could be a high likely that it would happen in our lifetime, but like, what do they call it? EMP, where like all electricity goes down.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so when we think of even
no modern vehicles.
Cyber attacks or, modern vehicles, you don't have, so, you know, when you think of even just that kind of aspect of like, are you prepared to not have power for a you know, number of days or weeks or maybe ever, you know, depending on the situation. Right. But
well, we've even we've done it a few times when the kids were at home where we would actually test it. And of course, you know, I'd set it up for a win, but we do, you know, like a 3-day drill where we just take the power away. I'm like, all right, no power. Like, and then like just retool your world for 72 hours.
Yeah.
And what do you do? And that's a safe way where, you know, if someone's obviously, you know, want to hurt anybody, but if someone's getting too cold or something's not going well, you got power and you can deal with it. But it also helps. It's like a shakeout, or what we call in the military, like a dirt dive. And you go through the motion. You're like, wait, we're not ready for this. I didn't think about that. Yeah. Or, wow, the flashlight, we haven't changed the batteries in 10 years and they're all corroded.
Yeah.
You know, so it's those little things. And you're like, all right. And even like we label, like almost all our things are in clear containers now. So we can see what's in them. Before we'd have a tape on there and then we'd change things up. And then you open up the box, it's supposed to have medical supplies. And then it's, you know, it's a bunch of cardboard toys from the kids or whatever.
Yeah.
So I think a shakeout's healthy.
I was saying, that's what I was going to ask you about next was, you know, we talked about just like preparing material wise, like, you know, a cache of food or, you know, having batteries or flashlights and all that stuff. But when it comes to even hard and soft skills, you know, that can help us to be prepared as well. So you mentioned like being able to work on your own car or even just know how to grow food or even, you know, slaughter animals or, you know, things like that, like, or hunt.
How do you defend your family? Do you know how to use a weapon? You can be very anti-weapon, but it's something like at least explore non-lethal weapons if you don't want to own, you know, a lethal weapon like a pistol or a shotgun or something like that. Have the ability to defend your family, I think, is probably one of the highest level things that you should be trained up on, because most of the emergency response people, if it is a true big scenario, they're going to be overwhelmed. So they're not going to be running to your house with the local yokels kicking your door in. So you need to figure out how you're going to defend your family. And then I would say the other hard skill that you can't just read in a book and figure out on the fly is trauma medicine. Like, spend some time, you know, taking a first aid class and knowing how to stop bleeding, how to make sure you can give someone an airway. Yeah. And these hard skills are so important, and you need them ingrained. Like, you don't want to be reading these in a book. when someone you love isn't breathing.
Yeah.
That's not the time to figure out a tourniquet if they're bleeding out. It's like you should already have practiced that and know how to do it. And so I think those are the two biggies, is like, how to defend your family and then how to treat your family. And all those things cross over to really our daily activities. There's a really good chance, everyone listening will be in a car wreck one day. And there's a really good chance in that car wreck someone has a major bleed. Yep. And you can save that life with a tourniquet.
Yeah.
Simple.
Yeah, we had, we were just having dinner one night in our backyard, and her motorcycle crashed in our front yard. And we heard it, and we're the first ones on the scene. Ambulance didn't arrive for 12 minutes. This couple was out there almost bleeding out. And so, so just even having that, even if you're not a major event, like a natural disaster or like an EMP, don't prepare for the extreme if you're not prepared for just probably something. You'll come across a wreck if you're not in one, one day. And so to even be prepared, that's something that's valuable to Caroline and I. We just took that, stop the bleed training and just got, really, focused on being prepared for that, because we have 4 boys that are very adventurous. So chances of us being prepared for a bleeding incident at home is pretty likely too. So some of the the hard skills of for those things, but then mentally, how would you be prepared mentally, even some of the soft skills of leading your family if there was a natural disaster or an event like that? What do you recommend?
Well, there's a lot of things. I think we talked about this before, but I think drills are a really big one. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. That's what we did in the military. We trained and we drilled on things. But even I believe on one of our podcasts, we talked about, a fire drill for your family. Does everybody know where to go if there is a fire?
Yep.
Fire alarms are going off. You got little ones. You have little ones for sure. It's do they know what to do? Or or which parent is responsible to get them? Because it's going to be too overwhelming. You can't expect a 5-year-old under that kind of stress to say, I'll meet you at the mailbox, Dad. Yeah. You need to go get the 5-year-old. Mm-hmm. So you have those things. So I think, again, it's kind of doing the what if tree and then playing these things out. And there's plenty of good books out there where you can read. I think where you have to differentiate is, in a lot of the survival books, some of the better ones, they'll do a good job of explaining. This book is a book on how to survive 72 hours and to get rescued or to stay alive. This book is about bushcraft. We're going to teach you how to harvest a buffalo, and to make moccasins. That's great. That maybe isn't the first or even the top 10 things you need to know to do to survive 72 hours. But that's the kind of stuff I started geeking out on towards the end of my survival education. I loved all the bushcraft stuff. How does one go out into the wilderness and live forever? Doesn't necessarily mean those are the same skills you're going to need to make it through the next 72 hours.
Yep.
So knowing the differences, and then really we always, when I taught survival, I would always emphasize, don't purposely put yourself in a survival situation where you could actually die. That's dumb.
Yeah.
But what you can do is you can set up training that's pretty realistic, that you can stress yourself out, but you have a backstop.
Yeah.
So don't just go put yourself in the middle of a scenario and eat poisonous mushrooms and I wonder how I would respond to this. You're probably going to die.
Yeah.
But instead, it's when we talked about foraging, and finding food, it's so beneficial to go with an expert, because the books can only take you so far. And even the best ones, they're still not clear on some of the information. And so it's so much better to hang out. And some of the best people out there are not necessarily survivalists. They're gardeners.
Yeah.
So the little old lady clubs, I call them, there's a lot of wonderful ladies that are master gardeners in most communities. And you can go there and you can ask them questions. And then if you Google search, you can usually find someone, and hopefully they're not wrapped too tight, but you can find someone who could even walk around your property and just identify all the things on your own land. And even if you don't have land, just in that region.
Yeah.
Because every region, the plants are pretty similar. And so the whole point of this is it's so good to take classes ahead of time to get the experience. That's why I had that one picture when I taught survival for the students in Kodiak. Experience is a lot lighter than a backpack full of books. So getting reps and just doing it before the survival situation is one of the wisest things you could do. And I would say, again, this isn't out of spirit of fear. This is just being smart and wise.
Yeah. Well, and that leads to just a couple closing remarks of just how would we summarize what we should be prepared for. So, think of a guy that's watching this as a young family. We talked about, even just be prepared for those natural disasters, depending on where you live. So what are the most likely scenarios that you might find yourself in? And then, of course, like if you're not prepared for the likely scenarios, then I wouldn't even start preparing for the unlikely. Like you're talking about, like making moccasins from a buffalo. Like, that's not a skill that we might, we probably won't need to use that, most likely in the scenarios. But first aid treatment, getting
Medical.
first aid, medical stuff.
All
is
your
huge.
meds. Do you have your 90-day supply?
Do you have a backup supply of medication? Do you have a backup supply, of lights or, even power source,
Water.
Water, radio, like things like that to prepare for.
Right.
Those are more likely scenarios than, an all out, like, EMP, like where, the grid is down for, years and we need to survive on our own, or there's a zombie apocalypse or, things like that people are so extreme about that, motivate that fear muscle in your brain. But then also, like you said, I love what you're talking about with the drills. So like we've just started doing this, or being more intentional as our boys are getting older. We just walked through some different scenarios because we went through the Stop the Bleed training, and re-upped our first our first aid certified stuff, and just even telling the boys like where things are. So like even if one person in the family knows all the stuff and they go down, then what is because I remember you even telling a story how you would train different guys in your teams.
Point man.
Yeah. So what would you explain real briefly? Just recap. What would you do when you noticed that someone knew a lot of the information that the team needed to know?
Yeah, so we would have final training exercises, which all the military people know. But if you don't know that, like that's usually where you take all the training and you one giant scenario where you just put it all together. And a lot of times you would identify that one or two guys in that platoon were like the sled dogs, like everybody depended on them. They knew everything. And so usually I would have them die quickly in the scenario so that the platoon would have to figure out life without them to reveal how much that they were relying on those two individuals. I said, that's not the way it's supposed to work, guys. You know that from day one. The one example we always give is, in the SEAL teams and in any navigation group, boots on the ground, a point man is the guy that's leading with the map and compass. But it's everybody's responsibility to know how to navigate because the point man could very well be the first person who's shot and killed. Same with vehicles. Like just because, you got the driver and the navigator up front, like the guys in the back, they need to know what to do because those guys up front could take rounds and then you need to be able to jump in there and you need to be able to drive and get to where you're supposed to be going. So it's just critical that everybody knows what to do. And for me, as a 18 Delta and the medic in the SEAL platoon for the first half of my career, it was really important to me that other guys knew emergency medicine because, and when I would train them, I'm like, wait, you guys don't know what you're doing. Like, I want to make sure they knew how to stop a bleed because I might be the unconscious guy and I want to come home to my wife and kids if possible.
Yeah.
So in the end, like you want to be well-rounded and definitely well-trained on all categories.
Yep. Well, and even just, sharing with other people in your family. So you're not the only one that knows what to do in a first aid situation. If, if the first aid situation is on you, then they need to know where to find a tourniquet and how to use it. And then, another thing that we've been going over, just in the scenario of one, a fire in our house. So like we have, fire blankets near places that would probably most likely catch fire, like the kitchen. And so, our boys, imagine that. Like our boys are now starting to cook. So we, with open flames. So we definitely need to, know how to put out a grease fire pretty quickly. So even just talking about that, but then also if they're in the middle of the night, what do we do if you smell smoke or if you, see flames, or what do you do? And not to touch the doorknob, because it could be very hot, and if you have smoke, so we've gone over these different scenarios. A new one that we added recently was you wake up to gunshots in the house. What do you do? And it's like, do you stay, do you open the door to see what's happening? Do you stay out? So what's the different scenarios that we've gone through, and we don't want to, present fear, but at least with our boys, we're really trying to teach them to protect and to, to use skills and stuff. And so, so just different scenarios like that where, depending on where you are in the house and you hear someone break in, like, what do you do? And where do you go? What do you
know what you do. And all the 20 and 30-year-olds know, especially the males, right? They'll be like, Leroy Jenkins in charge.
Yeah. And so
we won't give away your plan though.
Yeah. And so, run, fight, run, hide, fight, right? Is that the
no? It's
scenario?
fight.
Yeah. And so, I'm not expecting my 5-year-old to,
go Cujo. He could bite a toe.
But that's the thing, like violence of action, right? So, catch him off guard with a lot of action.
They wouldn't see Clive coming.
Yeah, on his back like a spider monkey. Yeah. So when it comes to, even be prepared for different drills, different scenarios, helping your family understand, like, to be prepared in that way. And we're not talking about, going off grid and being a full-time prepper, and the Lord might lead you to that, but just always evaluate your motivation. Is it out of fear? Is it out of just self survival, or is it, so that you'll be in a position where you can actually help people in a major disaster or scenario where you could leverage that opportunity to even be a gospel light?
And I would say that's where you and we've wrestled with those 59 one another's in the New Testament. Mm-hmm. And again, I have friends that live off the grid, and great men and women that are doing that. And so to each their own. But as far as for me, when I look at God's word, I just don't see where I'm challenged by God to say, go remove yourself from the entire world, camp out until I come back. Like, I see myself as someone who's supposed to be salt and light and supposed to be involved where the darkness is at.
Yeah.
And living off the grid, as appealing as that can be on paper, in reality, it just doesn't match up with really what I feel called to do by God. And so, because believe me, like, if I could find, and I've shared this openly from the pulpit, like, if I could find a chapter verse that says, thou shalt live in a cabin in Alaska and fly fish for the rest of your life, like, I would
You'd be
memorize that verse and live it out.
You'd be obedient.
But it's not in there.
Yeah. Well, and I think it's important to know that prepping in itself is not inherently wrong,
Correct.
And it can be wise, actually, in many situations. But the motivation, of course, matters. Fear and self-preservation, they conflict with the gospel. So we don't want to, be people that are plagued by fear and only thinking of ourselves. But faith and love guide us toward God-honoring preparation. So that'd be my summary of where we would stand as Christians on, being preppers, or, of course, there's a scale there.
Well, and you could also, we could just play math here and reveal the sobering stat that we've shared many times with the church. 1 out of 1 die.
Yeah.
And so, like, you can prep all you want, but, like, when the Lord wants to bring you home, he's going to bring you home.
Yep.
So, again, nothing wrong with prepping, prep away, but what's your motivation behind it?
Yeah. Well, and I would say even, like, going even further past, like, we're here on earth temporarily. Regardless of how long we're here, it's still very temporary compared to eternity. And so, as much time and as much energy that someone would put into preparing physically, I think we should really consider preparing spiritually for eternity. So are we living for eternity? Are we prepared to, like, a lot of preparation or a lot of prepping has a lot to do with if something will happen.
Yeah.
100%, it will happen. You will die. You will face eternity, and it'll be either with God or without him. And so I think if we put the same kind of energy into preparing, for these natural disasters or, all this, doom and gloom stuff, I think we need to be really serious about being prepared spiritually, because that's 1 out of 1, 10 out of 10, 100% die. And so when it comes to being prepared for meeting your maker, I think that's way more important than physically prepping.
Before we leave that, it's been a while since we've actually gone over the gospel. Maybe you could just remind people. Maybe we got people listening today, they're not ready to meet God.
Yeah.
Like, what would you tell them?
Yeah. So I'd say, that God created you to be with him in a perfect relationship, because we have severed that relationship with sin. So if you've ever done anything wrong, if you've ever fallen short of perfection, missed the mark of a perfect bullseye ever in your life, like, you have fallen short of the glory of God, and that has separated you from him. And even if we try, we can't remove that sin by just covering it up with good deeds. We have to have the Lord actually take care of the heart problem, which is what he did when he sent Jesus to pay the price for our sins and to live a perfect life, die on a sinner's cross, and to be raised again on the third day, so that we could actually exchange our crummy life for his perfect righteous life, and that everyone that would trust in Jesus alone can have eternal life. And it doesn't have to start when we leave this earth. It can actually start now, and you can have abundant life here on earth, and it just never stops. So the gospel in a nutshell is that God has pursued us and has prepared a place. And in fact, in John 14, Jesus said, I'm going to prepare a place for you in heaven, in my Father's house. And what's kind of a cool picture of that is, back in Bible times, they had these things called insulas, where when you got married, you would actually not go build a house, on your own for you and your wife. You would actually build a room onto your parents' house. And that was the imagery that Jesus was using. He's like, I'm going to prepare a place for you. I'm going to go build a room for you on my Father's house.
So if I'm quoting you correctly, Jesus was a prepper.
He was a prepper.
He is a prepper.
He's preparing a place for us right now. For those of you that have trusted Jesus. He didn't know we were getting into a spiritual analogy here with prepping, but Jesus is preparing a place for those that love him and follow him, and that he knows personally. So so if you haven't trusted Christ, if you're listening to this and you haven't become a follower of Christ, you can do that anytime. You don't need us. You don't need to go to a church. You can just pray and trust Christ right now. So
Amen.
just talk to him. in the quietness of a moment, and just share your heart. And yeah, God says that if you confess with your mouth that Jesus is Lord, then you'll be saved.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah. So on that note, we have one more survival tip. Speaking of prepping, being prepared. So we have everyday carry.
Yep.
Survival tip. So EDC, it's a whole industry as well.
That's right.
And
a lot of the listeners probably know what that means. And
yeah,
I think what we're talking about today is there's different levels of survival kits. So I picked that one because of our topic. And so you have the EDC stuff, the everyday carry. And again, the two biggies I talked about is like, do you have a weapon or weapons? Do you have the ability to defend yourself and others? And then do you have the ability to deal with serious trauma, medicine? And so what I'd like people to think about is this is something to rehearse and maybe save up for. Maybe you can't buy everything right away. But what do you carry on your person? That's one level of care. And then a lot of us have vehicles. Now, some of you might be riding bikes to work. So then think about what kind of kit could you have on your bike? Obviously, you need stuff to take care of your bike. That's your transport. And if you're in a vehicle, you need stuff to take care of your vehicle. But then you can also carry more. Like I have a truck. So I can carry a lot of stuff that I wouldn't normally carry on my person in a survival situation. You can carry specific things, like I have a big chain, to pull a big tree out of the road if a tree falls down. I did that the other day, people were all standing in line on this back country road. So I just kind of wandered up there and saw a big tree, and I was like, well, I got my work gloves, I got a chain. I was like, if you guys, make sure traffic doesn't come this way and that way, like I'll get it out of there. And like a couple of guys helped me get the chain around the tree and just pull it out of the way. So there's things like that, right? Or we had a police officer here a while back. His car wouldn't start, so I had one of those little battery jumpers. I just placed it on there. I had to put my vehicle up and get that awkward angle, my battery matching his battery. So I would just say, and even like retool and think, what would you take with yourself on a plane? Like, okay, you check in your bag. So all the fun stuff is checked. So what do you have on your person to deal with an emergency? So you want to definitely look at your TSA guidelines and all that stuff. But every mode of transport, just looking at what you can carry. What are you going to carry with you if you go to a hotel room? Are you going to check a weapon so that you can have a weapon if you're doing business somewhere for a week? Is it that big of a deal? Or you're like, no, I'm not going to take a weapon with me because I don't want to deal with it. And so there's all these decisions I think each man or woman needs to make for themselves. But I think in the end, and I had lists that I would have for the stuff that I would have and different, like, if I was driving an ATV or a snow machine in Alaska, or if, I had my truck. And so I had different kits, and then I just had go bags I could grab, like, all right, I'm going to be in a search and rescue and I'm going to be working off the back of an ATV, or I'm going to do snow machine. Sometimes it's a little different, depending on the season, right? Yeah. Sometimes it's an avalanche rescue. So you're taking your beacon out with your snow probes and all the other stuff. But if it's summertime, then you're not taking that stuff, right? And so it's really looking at the specifics of your situation. But one of the greatest survival tips you can have is to have kits that are prepared. And I would argue, and I think I've shared this before when we talked about survival kits, have one kit with the same equipment that you train with, but have one that you do not touch. Mm-hmm. Like that's for emergencies. Because if you work out of the bag, that's for your survival situation, let's say you deplete all your fire starting stuff because you were just using it for fun camping, and you forget to replenish it. Well, now your survival kit, when you actually need that fire, you're kind of out of luck. Yeah. So it's just good to train with the materials you have. And by all means, don't buy a kit and don't play with the stuff. Like, know in advance how things work.
Where everything is.
Get all the wrappers off and all that stuff.
Everything.
And then don't be afraid to test stuff. Like I remember a student one time challenging me on different things. It was like, I hear that if you throw a space blanket into a dryer, that'll be noise free. I was like, I've never read that before. Let's try. So we threw it in there, left it in for an hour, and we pulled it out. I was like, I don't think it works. He's like, I don't either. I said, there you go. Yeah. I said, so sometimes you don't need to meet with anybody to discuss these things. Just try it. Yeah. And I liked his idea because space blankets do drive you nuts. They're super noisy. Yeah. And I learned that like after an hour in a dryer, they're still noisy. So
it'll get softer.
Yeah.
Yeah. So survival kits, everyday carries. What do you carry on your person? What do you carry in your vehicles? What do you have at home, that you can grab? Now there's so many, we could do a whole episode on bug out bags, bug in bags, get home bags.
Oh yeah.
There's a lot of stuff there that, that we can just be prepared. I mean, really it's just being wise about what potential situations you might find yourself in. So, I mean, like even a vehicle wreck, we were talking about this since we've done the stop the bleeding. I mean, tourniquets are like, I've never thought about tourniquets as much as I do now, just because that's a very common scenario where you might find yourself in.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, even like basic chores, like I never do chainsaw work without a tourniquet.
Yeah.
Because I've met a lot of experienced chainsaw people who've killed themselves with
My
a chainsaw.
father-in-law almost did. Yeah. He had a chainsaw.
I know. Right to the neck, right?
Right to the neck. Almost
That's
as
a tough
crowded.
tourniquet
Yeah.
placement.
Yeah. That's not exactly tourniquet, but yeah, but he lived to tell the story. So, all right. Well, that concludes our episode for this week's Warriors Walk. Thank you so much for tuning in. If you are watching this on YouTube, many of the people that watch our videos on YouTube are not subscribed. So if that's one of you, please subscribe so that you won't miss a further episode. It always helps us to grow when you like and comment and subscribe. So make sure you're doing that, and we'll see you guys next time on the Warriors Walk.